And I am live. This is your boy, Internal Sadist. And this video is going to be about Red Pill Parenting 2. So this is a series that I said I was going to be doing for some time, at least till about a minimum of 7 of these are going to be produced. Um, this is going to be about various different aspects of parenting, start to finish. Types of parenting also is going to be in this series. Um, Other things like that for all intents and purposes. So it's going to be one of those things where you're going to get a lot of information on parenting from start to finish for all intents and purposes. Um, it's going to sound like it's going to be a lot, but it's really not a lot. That's why I'm breaking it up into multiple different. This is typically why I'm breaking it up into multiple different podcasts and at least about 7 minimum. So this is going to be a 7. There's going to be different styles of parenting, how to parent, better parenting, stuff like that. Better ways to get around parenting. Like I said, basically, it's going to be about just about parenting, start to finish. If you're a parent, if you're a red pill man, or if you're a red pill man, or if you're a MGTOW man and you're raising your children, or if you're a grandma, granddad, or if you're if you're a woman and you happen to stop in here, you're welcome to stop in here also as well to get this lovely teachings. So everybody's pretty much welcomed. Let it be anybody from any walk of life. I don't as long as you have a child to raise, you're this is pretty much going to be for you. This is Red Pill Parenting 2. This one's going to be about mate selection. The first thing to remember about first number one parenting thing to remember basically is what it is. Um, Child rearing, health problems, and risks. So this one's going to be about that. So it's going to be about mate selection. Um, Number one parenting thing to remember, and child rearing and health and child rearing health problems and risks for all intents and purposes. So this is going to cover this portion of that. So this is going to get a little bit of gory, and some people might be upset by this, but it is what it is. It's pretty much science, so therefore it's going to hurt. Science always hurts. That's why it's science. But yeah, um, the neat thing about it is I'm going to start with the number one parenting thing that all parents should remember when having children. It's not about you, it's about your children. That's the number one rule I always want to beat into people's heads, or I always want to remind people when it comes down to it. It's not about you anymore, it's about your children now. This is typically how this works. The sad part about that, everybody gets caught up in their own damn feelings, um, that they tend to forget, or they tend to not understand that fact as a parent, that being a parent is not about you, it's about your children now. So you got to give up your selfishness and be selfless for your children. This is typically how this stuff works. There's a nice way to balance, maintaining your well-being and health while still maintaining your children's well-being and health. I'll get into that also in this lovely live stream. But typically, this is something that a lot of parents in this day and age forget about, especially women, single mothers. Your life is not about you anymore. It's about your children. The faster y'all figure this shit out, the better off you will all be. Because at the end of the day, women make decisions. Women don't make this. People, like what I've noticed with a lot of women, especially when they go to divorce, they don't make decisions for their children. They make decisions for themselves. This is typically how this shit works, because women don't really think long term when they actually go through a divorce. They don't really think about the long term effects, or the fallout, or the psychological effects that it has on their children. All they care about is themselves. This is typically how a lot of this stuff works, especially the women who marry a man just so they can make it to the 10-year mark and divorce men, or they make it to like depending on they try to cut their losses depending on how much money they're going to get out of the man. Typically, is how it works. Let it be 10 years, 7 years, 8 years, depending on where you are and where you live at in the United States. You know, it's pretty much a free ride if you make it past either 8 years or 10 years, depending on where you live in the United States. It's typically how a lot of that works. In some states, if you're not married that long, then you're probably not really you're not entitled to too much of anything. But if you're married for in certain states for like half the like we'll say about 5 years or 6 years, basically, you're entitled to half of you're entitled to like being taken care of for like a small portion of your life. But women tend to think at least till like 10 years or 8 years, depending on what your minimum cap is on your state, so you can have a full ride for the rest of your life. Is typically how this stuff works. So that's the first thing I want to start off with is that women. The first thing I want to start off with is parenting is not about you; it's about your children. That's the number one rule that I want everybody to remember. Man, woman, child, man or woman, transgender, gay, straight, lesbian, whatever the hell you are. The number one thing is parenting is not about you, it's about your children. I don't know how many times I got to stress this or drive this home to people, but at the end of the freaking day, it is not about you, it is about your children. Forget what you got going on, it's about your children. If you don't get enough sleep, that's on you as a parent. If you it's not your child's fault, it's your fault. If you can't get the proper nutrition that you need, it's not your child's fault, it's your fault. Because at the end of the day, all that BS is nothing more than excuses for the fact that you're a bad parent and you don't know how to take care of yourself. So what the hell are you doing taking care of a child in the first damn place? Typically, this is a lot of the excuses that I'll hear that a lot of parents will say, well, oh, it's hard. I'm home with the children. I barely get any sleep. This, that, and the other, this, that, and the other. You should have thought about that when they went to sleep. That's typically how this works. Well, I had chores. Okay, they can wait until they wake up. Take your ass to sleep when they go to sleep. That's the best time to go to sleep as a parent is when your children go to sleep. That's typically how this shit works. The problem that I have with a lot of parents, a lot of people, is I'll hear complaints like, well, this, that, and the other, or well, I couldn't do this because of my children, or this, that, and the other because of my children. That's a cop out. That's a fucking cop out and a half. Suck it up, cupcake. Learn through trial and error, or learn on the spot that when you can and cannot get sleep. And the sad part about that, I hear this so much from people. They always make up excuses on why they can't do something or why they're so tired. Sleep while they're sleeping, like I said. If you're not going to do that, then there's no point in even you. Why are you a fucking parent if you can't take care of yourself? Because I look at it like this: you shouldn't be a parent if you can't take care of yourself. Period. If you weren't that good at taking care of your damn self, you shouldn't try to be trying to be taking care of another living being or another living human being for all intents and purposes. Because at the end of the day, the problem with that is people always try to pretend or try to make it sound like they're doing all the best they can, or they're doing what they can, when in fact you're really not even trying at all. You're basically just, it's basically like two popsicle sticks and you hope and pray that it works out for you, basically. Um, and this is typically a lot of the mindsets of a lot of parents that actually take care of kids nowadays in this day and age. They tend to always think it's about them when in fact it's not about them. It's about your children. If you can't think about your children, or if you can't make a decision that doesn't revolve around yourself, and that's supposed to be just for your children, you have a problem, my child, and you need to work on that. That's typically how that works. So at the end of the day, no matter how you cut it, no matter how much you want to cry about it, no matter how much you want to complain that you don't get enough sleep, or you're not getting enough to eat, or you're not doing enough of anything, at the end of the day, it's all about your fucking children. So what I propose to you is basically this. So we can not hear about your complaints about not being able to sleep. Try sleeping when your children sleep. I don't want to hear no bogus excuses about chores and stuff needed to be cleaned. That can be done when they wake up. That can literally be done when they wake up. If the house needs clean, it can be done after they wake up. That's pretty much how that works. So all that BS where, well, the house was dirty, and well, it's going to be dirty. You have children. Duh. Quit using excuses. Take your ass to bed. Take your ass to sleep when your children take their ass to sleep. So you can actually take care of yourself just as much as they take care of themselves, just as much as you're taking care of them. Because you're of no use to your children if your ass is tired and you mess up. It'd be like if a nurse basically was tired on her shift and she pushed the wrong stuff through an IV. Now that patient's dead. It's the same concept with your own children. Get your ass some rest as much as humanly possible. It's not about you, it's about your children. So when your children go to sleep, you take your ass to sleep. When your children are up, that's when you actually start doing some actual work around the house. That's it. No more excuses on that. On top of that, the same thing applies when it comes to eating and feeding your children. I don't want to hear no bull crap about, well, I couldn't eat because the children needed to eat. Well, you should have been eating while you prepared their food, or you should have been eating while they're eating. Either way, you're messing up. You're messing up. It doesn't matter if you didn't have a taste for it. Eat it. You need it in your system. You need it in your system so you can take care of your children. I don't want to hear no more excuses from parents talking about, well, this, that, and the other, and I couldn't eat because, my children were needed to eat. While you were making your children food, you should have been making yourself food also. You don't need no extravagant shit to sustain yourself. You can pretty much eat the same thing your children are eating. Let it be a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a bologna sandwich, a freaking hot pocket, pizza pockets, applesauce, whatever the hell, you eat it too. If your children are eating it, and it's not like baby food, you eat it too. This is typically how this works. Because at the end of the day, if you have a child and you heat up their food, it still needs there's still a period of time for cool down for that food, so they can actually be able for them to consume it as a baby. Let it be the bottle, let it be the baby food, let it be all that stuff. There's a period of time that you wait for it to cool down so you don't burn the roof of their mouth or burn their tongues out of their mouths. So in that same amount of time that you're doing this, you can be making yourself a sandwich, or you can be eating an apple or an orange or something along the lines of that. Carrots, celery, you name it. Eat it, and love it. That's going to be pretty much what you're going to be used to, especially if you're a single parent. It's what you're going to have to be used to. If your children are eating carrots, you eat the carrots too. If your children like hummus, you got to learn to like hummus. It's that simple. Because I'm tired of parents always complaining about not eating and stuff like that. If your children are eating, you should be eating too. Like I said, if your children are sleeping, you should be sleeping too. It's that simple. Because this is the problem that I have with people, because they always try to make it about themselves when it comes to parenting, when in fact it's not about you. It's about your children and how to give your children the best possible care possible without compromising and or sacrificing anything for all intents and purposes. Because you don't want to be that sacrificing parent, or you don't want to be that parent that's, looks like a scatterbrain when they show the hell up. So at the end of the day, eat when your children eat, and sleep when your children sleep. I wanted to get that out the way first for all intents and purposes, because you got a lot of people that say, well, I can't do this because of this and chores, and the house was a mess. Okay, the house is going to be a mess. The house is always going to be a mess when you have children. I can't think of a time when my house wasn't a mess with children. Even when I clean it, last I was always going to roll out some Legos or some Hot Wheels or some type of toys. Or I got my daughter over there with the dolls and the barrettes and the combs and shit like that. So, yeah, no, that's not a good excuse at all. I've done it. I've been through it. It's easy. It's not hard in the least bit. And that's typically how a lot of this stuff works. People like to make excuses for not fulfilling their full duties in a relationship, and or their full duties as a parent. They make up a shit ton of excuses not to follow through as a parent, or they make up a shit ton of excuses not to be a good husband or wife, or a good mother or father for all intents and purposes. At the end of the day, like I said, if your children are sleeping, you take your ass to sleep. If your children are eating, you better be eating too. It don't matter what they're eating, you better be eating. It's got to be something fast or quick. If their meals are fast and quick, if you don't, you better learn to like hot pockets, carrots, whatever the hell, celery, all this shit. Put it in your system, because you need it to take care of your children at the end of the day. So no more bogus excuses on why you're tired, or that you're hungry and you haven't eaten all day, when in fact you should be doing that while your children are doing this stuff. If you're sleeping, sleep. If you're eating, eat. That's typically how that stuff works. Moving right along to another thing, that keeping you know, this whole entire parent thing in mind when you're a parent, it's not about you, it's about your children. Moving right along to the next thing. When it comes down to it, you want to have a partner that is both healthy, and you want to have a partner You want to have a partner that's very healthy for all intents and purposes. And you want to have a partner that, that won't pose any risk to your children. This is typically what I'm talking about when it comes to long-term goals, when it comes to parenting. Because you want the best optimal outcome for your children. You don't want somebody because they look good and they have a fat ass. You want the best optimal outcome for your children. This goes into mate selection and child rearing and health risks. So this section is going to hurt a lot of people's feelings, and it's probably going to make a lot of people sad because there's a lot of people that either a have these problems and or that are um that are typically running through a lot of this shit, and that is mate selection. We'll go with mate selection. We'll might as well talk about mate selection now. Mate selection is one of those things that's very very important when it comes to parenting, because at the end of the day, if you date somebody based on you taking, we'll say, birth control pills, you're gonna date somebody who is similar to your family or has similar hormones to your family, which means your gene pool is going to be very very small. It's typically how that works. So if you're a woman and you're picking your mate while you're on birth control, that's the worst time to pick your mate. It is what it is, and it's just true. Because at the end of the day, they've done many studies with women on birth control where they pick something similar to their dad, or they pick something opposite what their pH balance is or needs, and you end up in a relationship after you get off the birth control. You end up in a loveless relationship with a person you don't even fucking like, or you hate their fucking guts. That's typically how that works. When you take birth control, your body, your hormones changes and your pH changes and all the chemicals in your body change to the point where now you're dating somebody that you normally wouldn't date if you weren't on birth control. This is typically why a lot of the women end up divorced or single and lonely, because they're dating somebody on birth control that they normally wouldn't date if they weren't on birth control. That's one of the many problems too. Another problem is for guys. Just because she has a fat ass, just because her titties are standing out there on at attention, that don't make her a great mate. Now, I will say this: there are a lot of guys who only go with women for the intent to sleep with them and end up in a long-term mess. This is typically how this shit works. And the sad part about that is it is what it is. It's true. There's a lot of men that only going with a woman only to sleep with her for a short period of time or just to hit it and quit it and end up in a long-term mess. This is typically one of the many problems with mate selection too. There's a lot of guys that think with their big small head and don't think with their big head and don't end up thinking about the consequences, because all they know is they just need they need to bust a nut real quick in a woman. That's all they fucking know. And the sad part about that is when you think with your small head and you don't think with your big head, you tend to forget little things like condoms, you know, um, what the woman looks like, if she's even your type, or if she's even up to par for you. If it's somebody that you would normally date, or if it's somebody that you're just trying to bust a nut in. And this is typically the problem that a lot of men run into, I've noticed, when this is actually happening, because they're thinking with their small head and they're not thinking with their big head. So they'll end up like knocking up a chick that they normally wouldn't even sleep with, because they just needed to bust a nut, and because they were basically suffering from blue balls. And this is typically one of the many things that happens in that lovely that lovely dance at the beginning. So you got men who are thinking with their small head and just need to bust a nut real quick and end up in long-term situations for no reason whatsoever. Yes, I just bought a long-term situation. That's pretty much all it really is. At the end of the day, is long-term situations. You're ended up in a long-term situation, not a relationship. When you bust a nut in a woman, not really thinking with your big head. It's typically how a lot of this shit works. So at the end of the day, when it actually takes place, now you're stuck with a woman and you have a child with a woman that you probably never even wanted to have a child with in the first place, because shit happens. This is typically how a lot of this shit works. The same thing on a woman's side of things. You end up in relationships with men who tend to who you tend to not really be who you normally wouldn't mesh with if you're on birth control. That's one of the many things and the problems that people tend to run into while they're in relationships, and it's one of those big things. The second thing that men and women run into when it comes to relationships, you pick the wrong person to want to have children with. Both sides do. Um, and men only has one problem where they think with their small head, and now this is this, and now we're here for all intents and purposes. Whereas women, they pick guys based on meaningless things that mean nothing at the end of the day, and they think that it's going to work out for all intents and purposes. So poor decision making when it comes to women's part by picking a person. Like a good example of that is I don't know how many times I done just chilled at family court just to see all the train wrecks that come out of there and all the women that meet men who there for child support at family court and end up hooking up with them and end up back there the next month or year or 9 years or 9 weeks or I mean 9 months or a year later basically taking that person to court for child support. So at the end of the day, it all comes down to bad planning, or bad poor judgment and bad planning for all intents and purposes. Because at the end of the day, just because you can't change a man, if a man's there for child support court in the first damn place, and you meet him at child support court, that doesn't mean you could change the man at child support court while you're taking your own baby daddy to child support court. It doesn't work like that. You're making bad decision after bad decision after bad decision at that point. That's typically how a lot of this shit works. And the sad part about that is men 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 play on the fact that that they're a single mother and it's only going to be a temporary thing for them and they don't really plan on being with that single mother. Then they accidentally knock that single mother up too. So now they got two baby mamas, one that they knocked up that they were in court for before, and now this one that they was just trying to smash because she came out of court with a fat ass, you know. And it's typically how that stuff works. So now you got two problems going on top of the compounding on top of all the other problems with women. You got the birth control effect, and now you got the poor decision making effect for all intents and purposes. And I can at least give you a pass for birth control because they've done studies on it, and that's pretty much how that works. But I'm not going to give you a full pass because the studies are public, and you should know if you're going to be picking a mate, you might not want to take birth control. Typically, how that works. And depending on the birth control, it stays in your system for a decent amount of time. So, yeah, you might want to wait till that wears off in your system so you can actually pick your perfect partner until all the chemicals in your body go back to normal. It's typically how that works. On top of that, quit picking, because the sad part about this, women suffer from the same thing that men do in the second half of this, which is poor decision making. They make decisions based on their pussy getting wet or fantasies or, what they believe that a person, what they're fantasizing about in their head. So they typically take on a man that they probably shouldn't take on in the first damn place, all because of fantasies and feelings. That's typically how that works. So the first half was basically mate selection. And moving it right along from mate selection to health risk that can happen, we'll skip over. We'll go with child rearing, basically. Child rearing of the mate selection. Child rearing is one of those things that people take for granted and don't really think too much about because this pretty much bankrolls into health problems and risks for all intents and purposes. What's up, Shinobi Wan? So this base pretty much banks rolls into child rearing and health problems and risks pretty much bankroll into one big thing. The problem with child rearing isn't the fact that you have people getting into relationships that they probably shouldn't be in the first place. It's more so the fact that you got people are in relationships that they shouldn't be in. A good example of this when it comes to child rearing is I was talking about this at the beginning about like health risks that you pose upon your children by picking a certain mate. I talked about the whole entire birth control thing, and you basically picking somebody that you normally wouldn't pick if you weren't on it, which limits your gene pool for all intents and purposes, unlike it would if you were picking somebody not on birth control, which would actually open up your gene pool and make it a much more bigger gene pool for genetics to pull from. Um, when it comes down to it, is typically how that works. The sad part about that is when it comes to child rearing, a lot of men Boy, Tico's your dad now. Listen to you. And the thing that comes when it comes down to it, when it comes down to child rearing, and the health risk is never pick a person who's reaching that age, that certain age, for all intents and purposes. When it comes to women, men never pick a woman, never have children with a woman who is starting to be in her late 20s to early 30s. Don't do that because that poses a whole slew of health risks. Good example of that is Down syndrome, autism, like severe cases of autism. Not the mild cases of autism, the severe cases of autism. So for those of you who have mild cases of autism, this pretty much exempts you for the fact that that can actually be a thing based on um diet, and diet, the diet of your mother and you, and the diet of in your environment for all intents and purposes. So that could be people with like mild cases of autism. That's typically brought on by something along the lines of that. For mild cases of autism, so it could be environment, it could be your mom's diet during the pregnancy, it can be any other complications that went on during the pregnancy, stuff like that. So typically, because at the same time, back in the 80s, hospitals weren't as great as they are now for all intents and purposes, nor were they as efficient as they are now. So typically, a lot of the people who end up with autism that are in their 30s or their late 20s and their late 20s and 30s, typically what happens with that is you're basically well, now I can't really say early 20s because no, because that would be more so anything else. I would say what like I would say anywhere but from 29 on. That's basically brought on by environment, diet, poor dieting, and stuff like that, and you know stuff that was going on, and quite possibly a gene pool problem. So people who have a mild case of autism, you're exempt from this one. The severe cases of autism basically comes from dating somebody either that's that's out of their child rearing age range, or dating somebody, because I was talking about this in um MGTOW, absolute knowledge is live stream when it comes to women. And the sad part about that, you would never know based on their genetics, basically, because you can't open them up and be like, genetically, you're a dud. But there are a lot of women who are in their mid 20s who actually run into this problem earlier in life. So they basically run into the same problem that you would in your mid to late 30s to 40s. And the sad part about that is you would never know you're picking that person when you're going about it. And typically, a lot of the times with that is that what happens with that is picking a woman like that, basically, picking a woman, especially in this day and age. Like a good example of that is if she had multiple abortions. Um, if she's had multiple abortions, that's not a good person to pick for relationships for all intents and purposes. Her body, her choice. But if you want to have a chance of actually successfully having a child, or not running into miscarriages, or her not really being able to have a child because she had multiple abortions, that's not the best person for you. Um, Typically, I would say if you're going to pick a woman, she's got to at least have under at least minute. She has to have at least a minimum of at least what I would say two abortions maximum. Sometimes two actually destroys the whole entire thing, but two is usually the mid number. I would say one abortion on it to be on the safe side, two abortions if you want to push the envelope. So if you're going to date a woman, you want to make sure she didn't have more than two abortions for all intents and purposes. You want her to have none or one. You want her to basically have none or one for all intents and purposes, because typically she's going to run into problems later on down the line from all the scraping and the pulling the baby out of her womb for all intents and purposes. So there's a lot of shit that goes into this. So typically, while you're picking your mate, you want to make sure her abortion rate is reasonable. It's got to be at least, I would say, a minimum of one. I would say it's got to be at least a maximum of one, or between 0 and 1, to be on the safe side. If you're going to pick her, and if she has any more than one abortions, I would say two abortions maximum, because that you start to run into more risk and more miscarriages and other great stuff. And the sad part about that is when you start running into miscarriages, those start racking up, or miscarriages start racking up on her body, and it takes a toll on her body too at the same time. Because the sad part about that, those miscarriages tend to actually affect the woman's body negatively. Sometimes, sometimes what miscarriages is miscarriages are, certain births that end very badly, is stillbirths or stuff like that. Is sometimes her uterus or her womb will absorb the baby. Another problem that you'll probably run into as well. Um, Absorb zy- the zygote basically, or the baby as it's like forming. It's typically how that works too. So it's one of those things where, like, if she's getting all these abortions and like you're basically scraping the stuff out of her womb, you know, a lot of sometimes the baby would basically be absorbed into her womb to heal that basically the scraping and the tissue tear and all that stuff to actually basically. And so like a lot of miscarriages happen that way. A lot of false pregnancies happen that way too. Well, it's not false pregnancy, she was pregnant, but unfortunately it was absorbed to heal some shit. It's typically how that works, but it never really heals it perfectly because she runs into that problem again and again and again and again, because that baby that was absorbed into her womb actually poses a problem for the next baby too. So that's one of the many problems that you'll run into when it comes down to it. It's sad, but it's so true. Another problem that you'll run into with a woman that had multiple abortions is basically the chance of her having a child is slim to none. I talk about my one friend Dana, who had she had at least, what, when I first met her, I think it was I think I said somewhere between what 10 and it was like 10 or 11, 10 or 13 abortions already when I actually met, at the time that I actually met her. Before that, she had multiple abortions before that. But when I met her, from the time I met her till the time from the time till now, basically, I know of only about 10 to 15 abortions. I would say 10 to 13 to be on the safe side, because I might be blowing up her numbers a little bit more, but I know somewhere between 10 and 13 for sure abortions that she had since I've actually met her till now. Now she's having a problem with actually being able to have children, now that she wants to settle down and actually be a mom. Now she's having problems with actually having children. So the sad part about that is every time she goes in, or every time something happens, it's either a miscarriage, or it ends up being one of them things where, like, it ends up being a false pregnancy for all intents and purposes, or one of those things where, like, she loses the baby for all intents and purposes, or it just doesn't happen. She's been trying and trying and trying and trying and trying and trying, and she just can't have a child. That's typically one of the many problems that you'll run into with abortions. Now, I don't care what a woman does with her body. I'm just not taking on your debt for all intents and purposes. So technically, the taxing of your body is a debt for your children, your future children, and your future significant other. It's typically how that works, because you destroyed your womb enough, so there's a high chance you may not be able to have children, or you may not be able to have healthy children for all intents and purposes. So you're actually running a debt for your future children and your future significant other, who you plan to have children with. Is one of the many things that you'll run into as a parent, as a person, or a parent or woman for all intents and purposes. So you got to think about that. Typically, like I said at the beginning of the live stream, it's not about you; it's about your children. That's pretty much parenting in a nutshell. That's the number one rule that every parent should know about children. It's not about you; it's about your children. So you got to think about that every single time you make a decision. It's about your children. Anytime you make it a dumb decision, think about how it affects your children. That's typically the number one rule that I always tell most parents of children. It's not about you, it's about your children. You got to sort your shit out so you can be there for your children. It's about your children. What you got going on doesn't matter. It's all about your children. And that's something I always try to drive home to parents, or people that are, parents, or first time parents, or anytime parents, basically. And it's one of those things where it's like you gotta actually worry about that. Now, on to like actual women who hit a certain age, and like medical problems that actually happen in women. Like there's a lot of women in the United States today, especially white women, who are very barren, who can't have children and don't even know that they can't have children. And they're trying to go out here and have children and they're barren due to genetics and or other problems. And the sad part about that, there's a lot of men that are actually saddled up with these type of women who can't have children and don't even know it. It's typically how it works. But like the sad part about that is you as a man, it comes down to mate selection. You got to be able to know that she can do this and she can actually carry stuff full term in or to a healthy amount of months so you can actually have your children successfully or healthily. On top of that, you got to actually know her health problems on top of that so you can know if she can actually have children or not for all intents and purposes. Because there's no point in dating somebody. If you're in a relationship to have children, there's no point in dating somebody who doesn't want children and or can have children. So these are things that you need to know as a man going forward with a woman. Can she have children? Does she have any health problems that forbid her or that will hinder her from ever having children? Stuff like that for all intents and purposes. So you need to know this stuff as a man if you're going to date a woman and you want to have children in the future. This is typically one of those things where like a lot of men don't really think because they're too busy thinking with their small head. Okay, cool. On top of that, now you have to worry about another thing that you have to worry about is on top of the health problems that I already said, because there's women that have health problems at like 22, 18, 17, 23, any of those ages before she even hits like, 25 or 26, 27. There's a lot of women that have health problems before that actually hinder them or lessens their chances of having children that they don't either uh, address or B fix and or that is just genetics. Their family and it's just genetics for all intents and purposes. So there's a lot of those people. So you got to actually be able to figure out what's going on and how to pretty much get around it and traverse it for all intents and purposes, so you can have children successfully. Another problem that a lot of men run into is they'll have children with women who are anywhere between 26, 27, 28. I would say 26. I would say 27 and above for all intents and purposes. This is typically the ages where you're going to run into a lot of the health problems that you're going to have with your children. Um, Typically, I would say when you start hitting like 28, I would say 27. Anything over 27 is going to be very bad for you. As a man, when you're picking a woman to actually have children with, because that hires the risk of autism, like severe cases of autism, Down syndrome, um, breathing problems, preeclampsia on her part, because you'll end up with preeclampsia, um, and other crazy health problems that can actually happen post 27. So if you're not with her and you're not trying to have children when she's 27, that's one of those things where like either you're basically betting against the house. I'm going to use that analogy, like you're pretty much gambling and you're at the casino, you're betting against the house now for all intents and purposes, is the best analogy I can actually give you for dating a woman 28 plus. If you want to have children with her, you're basically betting against the house at that point. um, what I mean by house is you're betting against her genetics, hoping that she told you everything about her family history and family genetics and stuff like that in her family that's happened. So you're basically working off of if she actually told you all about her actual you know health, her overall health, and her family's overall health for all intents and purposes, or health risks or health problems that she has, which most women typically don't do anyway. They tend to keep it to themselves, or they tend to tell you the very short things because they know. Because this is the neat thing about women. Women know if they divulge too much information, like health problems or health risks, or that they have children or anything like that, that lessens their chances of actually being able to find a mate. This is typically why women lie about not having children, or lie about their health, or lie about stuff like that, or their age. Another good example of that is age, because they know that it lessens their chances of actually being able to find a mate that they actually want. So women will typically lie about their age, they'll lie about their health, they'll lie about, if they have children or any health problems, any family history health problems that they have, could possibly have it too, because that lessens their chances. And the sad part about that is women know this innately, And this is typically why they keep it to themselves, or they kind to they kind of like sweep it under the rug or downplay it when they actually tell you that they got these things going on health wise. As far as children, that's pretty much goes without saying. A woman lying for not lying and saying she doesn't have children, that's part of the course for all intents and purposes. Um, Something that you have to worry about is typically um, women that lie about their health or lie about their how many abortions she had, stuff like that is going to be your major concern as a man. Abortions, um, her health problems or health risks that she poses, her family histories, health risks that she'll pose too to you, and her age is another good factor in you know a child having problems. Typically, a lot of the times, what happens with a lot of these children and a lot of these women who have children post 27 is a lot of these children end up getting chromosome analysis testing. Um, they'll get like they'll get fetal fetal something. They'll get like I forget the name of it off the top of my head right now because I got so much stuff going through my head. But they'll have like fetal they'll get their children will end up getting fetal testing, or they'll do what's it called, the amniotic fluid testing of the baby to make sure everything's okay. Other testing, blood work, stuff like that, stuff that is invasive for the baby for all intents and purposes, to make sure they're not going to have any problems. The sad part about that is you tend to learn more about the woman during her pregnancy time because the OB panel pretty much knocks it out the park. If she's getting the OB panel for all intents and purposes, it pretty much knocks it out the park. You pretty much know, unless she's hiding her blood work or stuff like that, because that encompasses like her general blood work or general blood work that you normally get yearly. That encompasses like any sexually transmitted diseases, um, any problems that she could possibly be having with herself personally, and other things like that. Thyroid, I think it even got the thyroid in there, and several other things are actually included in that lovely panel, which is actually really, really nice. So if you're actually up on your wife, if you actually go to the doctors with your significant other and you get this checked, you pretty much can be up on it if she's not hiding it from you. So typically, her overall health is basically a part of this panel. On top of that, they'll get extra testing done for that too. So she'll get extra testing done on top of that, based on her OBGYN and what he believes that she actually needs. Just know if her OBGYN is ordering stuff that's not in the regular OB panel, you need to start looking at your wife a little bit differently, or your wife or your significant other a little bit differently. That's simply how that works. Because now you can actually tell she actually has health problems that she didn't tell you or didn't allude to or didn't let you in on for all intents and purposes. Is typically how that works. Another problem that you'll run into is also age. The age of a woman actually greatly affects the 100% success, the 100% success of child rearing. Um, and like I know we live in this era where I can wait to have a child and my body, my choice and stuff like that. At the end of the day, it's really not your body, your choice. It's actually, like I said before at the beginning, you're not doing it for you. You're doing it for your future offspring. This is for your future offspring. So whatever you do with your body destroys your body. Let it be alcohol, drugs, prescription drugs, stuff like that, can all destroy your body up to leading to actually getting pregnant for all intents and purposes. If you're a drug addict, if you're anything like that, because this is going to be very graphic. I remember I was working in a NICU. The mother was strung out on drugs. I shit you not. Now, the thing that happened with the baby was when the baby was born, this baby was born with her heart outside of her chest, her lungs were outside of her chest, her like a lot of stuff was just outside of her chest. You can literally see her kidneys through the little bit of skin, the thin layer of skin. You can see her kidneys, you can see her intestines, you can see all that stuff basically through a thin layer of skin that this baby basically had over some of those organs. And the sad part about that is her heart was literally taped to the outside of her chest, and her lungs were taped to the outside of her chest. Well, not really taped, but so just in case you jostle the baby, they won't fly all over the place and you won't damage those organs. So they were basically, placed to like matted to their chest for all intents and purposes for those reasons. Um, those are typically some of the reasons you can problems you can run into at what's up, a manly load. That's simply some of the problems you can run into if you're dating a woman who doesn't take care of herself health wise, or who dated you while she was on birth control, or dated you while she was actually probably taking drugs, or anything along the lines of that type of stuff. This is typically this is typically one of those things where you got to actually pay attention to what you're doing when you're actually dating a woman for all intents and purposes as a guy, because if she's dating you on birth control, you're not the guy that she really wants to be with. This is typically how a lot of breakups and divorces happen when a woman's on birth control. After she gets off birth control, she gets pregnant, and now all of a sudden she realizes she doesn't really like you the way she thought she liked you while she was on birth control. This is typically a lot of the things. So that's one of the many questions you should ask a woman if you're a man and you're going to get into a relationship with a woman. Are you taking birth control pills? It's just facts. If she's taking birth control pills, you don't want to date her. It's just facts. Because at the end of the day, if she's taking birth control pills, 9 times out of 10, when she comes off them birth control pills, you're going to be in a world of hurt as a man. That's typically how a lot of that stuff works. So you want to make sure, one of the many questions you want to ask her is, are you taking birth control? Because that birth control medicine actually alters her decision-making skills for partners while she's taking it. That's typically how that works. So if you're talking to a woman and you find out she's on birth control, you might want to back off. You might want to just leave it where it lasts for all intents and purposes, because that's not going to be a long-term relationship for you at the end of the day. It's typically how that works. Um, Moving right along to the next thing when it comes to health problems, like I was saying, that the overall age of a woman can determine greatly how healthy your child is going to be when it comes out the womb and when it's born. That's typically how this shit works. So what you're doing, what she's doing with her body, and what she's doing with her health, and how old she is, because typically this is what I was talking about, where women will lie about their age. This is one of those things you got to watch out for as a man. If a woman's going to lie about her age, because women will lie about their age because they know deep down inside that women of a certain age are less desirable. It's that simple. Unless the person's thirsty, or unless the person just want to smash and get it over with, typically anything for a long-term relationship wise, if a woman's over a certain age, a man's going to probably pretty much think twice about wanting to be with that woman, especially if he's going with that woman with kids in mind, having kids in mind. He's typically going to back off very slowly from that woman because he wants a better success rate, or a better outcome for his offspring. It's typically how that works. So dating a woman who's of a certain age, I would say about 28 plus, and then there's women that are younger than that run into a lot of problems, that are barren, that run into a lot of health problems where they have a low chance of having children, or they let chlamydia run amok in their body so it destroys their ovaries. There's a lot of women with chlamydia and gonorrhea that can't be cured, that destroy their ovaries and their uterus for all intents and purposes. So your childbearing chances are very, very low. There are a lot of women with one ovary because of chlamydia. It's just facts. It is what it is. It's typically how that works. Um, so it's one of those things where you want to know her history, and you want to know her health history when you get into a relationship with a woman. Her health history is very important to you. Don't let her tell you no differently, because if you want offspring with this woman, her health history is very important to you, just as much as your health history is very important to actually having children too. However, hers is more important than you, because she actually has to carry that baby. So you have to know what's going on with her body. So at the end of the day, her body, her choice ends up being your child's autism, or your child's Down syndrome, or your child's stillbirth, or your child's miscarriage, or your child's anything. That's typically how that works. You got to remember this stuff when you're dating a woman like this. Her past history, her past sexual histories are important too. Don't get me wrong, but if you want to have children with this woman, you need to know her health. so you can successfully have a baby with no problems, little to no problems coming out the gate. You don't want to date a woman where your chance of having problems are like 50%. You want to date a woman where your chance of your baby having a problem are anywhere between 10% and lower. That's as high as I'm willing to go when it comes to actually having offspring, because that's your best optimal chances of actually having a healthy baby. If it's 10% or less, if there's 10% chance or less of you actually having a problem, she ever having a problem, or your baby coming out with developmental problems, that's your best optimal choice. It's not the best. It's not the best in the world, but if you're going to have a baby with a woman, make sure the maximum chance of a problem happening is 10%. You don't want it over that at all, because that tends to start getting into hinky and gray areas for developmental problems when it comes to babies. Let it be, psychological problems. Let it be because of, anything that can happen psychologically. The brain don't develop properly, or the baby's not getting enough oxygen during the pregnancy to, the umbilical cord got wrapped around the baby's neck. Those are all problems that you're going to run into with women of a certain age. I mean, it's sad, but it's so true. I mean, I'm not being mean about it. I'm being very scientific about it, and it is what it is. It might suck, and it might be disheartening, but it is what it is. Never date a woman. I would say don't date a woman over 28. And even if the woman's under that, you always want to know her past history, her family history, her family medical history for all intents and purposes, because that's going to affect your children in the future too. Because you don't want to be saddled up with a woman that's barren, or you don't want to be saddled up with a woman that has some type of ovarian something at a young age, or some type of sexually transmitted disease at a young age that destroyed her chance of actually having a baby in the future. This is typically how this stuff works. Or you don't want to be saddled up with a woman who was born of a family with a lot of health problems that made her barren or made her so the chance of her having a baby is very slim to none. So you don't want that either. And this is where I like actually drop religion at, because at the end of the day, when it comes down to this is science. Praying that you might have a healthy baby is not the greatest thing in the world, because praying that you might have a healthy baby doesn't always work. Pretty much works out about you not having a healthy baby about 90% of the time. It's typically how that works. If you want to do things on a ring and a prayer, 90% of the times your baby's going to come out unhealthy for any type of problems, let it be developmental or mental, or let it be motor skills, let it be you know reflexes, anything like that. For all intents and purposes, can happen if you date a woman of this age, or date a woman who actually have historical family problems when it comes to childbearing, or health problems in general that can hinder or hurt the child's chances of actually growing and being being his best optimal self. That's typically how this stuff works. So you want to avoid that at all costs. Um, Other things that you have to worry about too is women who actually go through pregnancy late in life who have preeclampsia problems. A lot of these women tend to actually not only affect themselves, it affects the baby too. Because like stuff like that, stuff starts going out of whack with blood pressure or diabetes, or other problems like that start going. Everything starts going out of whack, and that affects the overall baby's health within the womb, because whatever's going on with her is going on with the baby. Whatever she's eating, the baby's eating. Whatever she's consuming, the baby's consuming. That's typically how this stuff works. So you never want to ever saddle yourself with a problem like that, because it sucks, and it doesn't epigenetics. Yeah, I meant to say that, but I couldn't remember what it was at the time when I was actually trying to think of it. Um, but the sad part about that is, thanks, Manly Low, for that. But the problem with that at the time, the problem with that you'll run into typically is, with all these health problems comes great stress, or great a bad pregnancy for all intents and purposes. This is typically the women. Like another good example of that is early births. If your baby's coming early, that's not something that should happen at the least bit. That is a health problem that falls upon the mother. Um, that's typically how that works. If your baby comes early, that's a health problem that you have to worry about. Like a good example, we'll just say on an off chance you'll meet a woman who was a widower. I mean a widow of and they had a child with the man, and you just say you want to be in a relationship with her. She's still young. She's still young, so she can still have babies. Okay, cool. What you want to know about that woman is was her last babies did they make it the full term, or they early for all intents and purposes? If they didn't make it the full term, that's a problem within itself. If they didn't make it a full term and it was a miscarriage, that's a problem. That's a problem within itself also. But if the babies don't make it the full term, if they make it to what, like 5, 6, 7, 8, like I would say 8 months is good if you're going to be with a woman that's if you want her to carry. I would say 7 months is starting to borderline like your baby's going to have some type of developmental problems. They might grow up healthy at first, but problems start persisting after they're born for all intents and purposes when they're born early. And this is typically one of the many problems that you'll run into. So this is one of those things where if you got to cross your fingers literally and hope and pray if the baby's born early, that this is where I'll actually bring religion back into it. Hope and pray that it's going to be healthy, or hope and pray that it's going to make it for all intents and purposes. Because at the end of the day, it's probably not going to make it. Yeah, genetics. Yeah, I knew what you meant when I knew what you meant though, manly load. But yeah, like I was saying, junk food equals junk baby, or junk genetics equals junk baby also. Um, so typically, when you actually meet your mate, you want your gene pool to be optimized to the most genetic material as humanly possible. That's simply what you want. So if you're on birth control, you're dating somebody, you have a baby with somebody while you're on birth control, you're not getting the most optimal genes. You're not getting the most optimal or the most genetic material in your gene pool if you date somebody while you're on birth control. That's typically how that works. Your hormones jack it up for you and it helps you make bad decisions. It's typically how that works. On top of the bad decisions that you're going to make anyway, even if you weren't on birth control. Typically, the problem with that is, like I said, birth control messes up your hormones. So therefore, it gives you a chemical imbalance. So you'll tend to pick people either similar to family or with hormones that you normally wouldn't go for if you weren't on birth control. This is typically one of those problems that you'll run into. And on top of that, if you're dating somebody because they look good, that doesn't optimize your gene pool. That actually minimizes your gene pool too. Because just because a person looks good genetically, that doesn't mean you're going to get all the genetic markers you need in your gene pool. A good example, a good case in point of that is with a lot of people. Everybody always talks about like blonde hair, blue eyes, blonde hair, blue eyes. Those are actually recessive genes. Those are recessive genes. Typically, how that works. Blonde hair, blue eyes are all recessive genes. Whether you like it or not, it is what it is. It's a recessive gene. Just like if you have a black child with auburn hair, that's a recessive gene. If you have a black child with blue eyes, that's a recessive gene. That actually happens. If you have a black child with gray eyes, that's a recessive gene. So gray eyes, blue eyes, auburn hair, blonde hair, recessive gene, equal recessive genes. Um, which is pretty much junk. I'm not going to refer to as junk genes. I'm going to refer to as recessive genes. Um, that's typically how that works. You may not like it, but it is what it is. So at the end of the day, blonde hair, blue eyes equals recessive genes. It is what it is. It sucks, but it's pretty much what it is. And if you have a black baby with auburn hair or blonde hair, that's a recessive gene for black people. Gray eyes, blue eyes, stuff like that, recessive gene. They may look good, but you're not optimizing your full genetic pool, your full genetic markers you could possibly get from your gene that your baby could get that your baby can benefit from your gene pool. Is typically how that works. Um, So it's one of those things where like you have to worry about it. However, I will say this: if you're white and you have gray eyes, that typically is not a recessive gene. But if you're black and have gray eyes, that is a recessive gene. Um, that's pretty much how that works. So at the end of the day, it's one of those things. They look nice. They're nice features. Don't get me wrong. There are nice features. They're nice features on people to have, I guess, if you that's what you want and that's what you're looking for. They're very nice features to have. But at the end of the day, it's like one of those things where it's like if you want to optimize your gene pool, like I'm willing to. Oh well, fine. Then I'm gonna say this: a manly low. What's the color of your hair though? Manly, I have gray eyes. You know what, Manly? I'm out to hurt you. I have gray eyes. You're fine. Actually, I have gray eyes. You're fine then. So you're pretty much fine as a white person if you have gray eyes. If you're black and have gray eyes, that's when you start running into the recessive problem. If you're black and you have auburn hair, and that's when you run into those recessive problems too. Um, and I don't mean like auburn. I mean like if it's starting to look more blonde than auburn, that's a recessive gene. Um, but typically, that's pretty much how that works. The sad part about that is, like I said, really, that's what you're going with. Really, Shinobi one. That's what you want to ask. um, typically, a lot of stuff like typically, what was blown at birth, it was still. Well, a good example of that, a good example, good comparison to that, a manly load is black children. When they're first born, they can be mistaken for white children. The melanin hasn't kicked in yet. That's pretty much how that works. So the um the actual gene for hair color hasn't quite kicked in yet. So that's typically how that pretty much works for a lot of children that were growing up. For all intents and purposes, if you're black, it's usually your skin. If you're white, it's usually like blonde hair. If you ended up with brown hair, those are good examples of that type of stuff. So just because you have blonde hair at birth, that don't mean it's a recessive gene. It's more or less the fact that it's a developmental thing. And your body was basically trying to work itself out at the time to basically make it so it can actually optimize optimize its gene pool for all intents and purposes. It's typically how that works. So it might be a developmental delay on your body based on what your body's actually going through at the time. It's typically the same thing if a black baby comes out light skinned or very very light and looks damn near white. It's going to take time for that baby to actually get the melanin in her skin. Because I've known black kids who look light up until they're like 1, 2, and 3. They look like light skinned children up until then, and their melanin started kicking in throughout the many years for all intents and purposes. So I've actually known that to happen to children too. Um, so that's fine. You're pretty much fine as far as that's concerned. Um, that's the same thing for black kids because I know a lot of black kids who are born with blonde hair on their arms or blonde peach fuzz on their body. That's one of those things where your body's basically working itself out and it's going to eventually get to where it needs to be for all intents and purposes. Because I know a lot of black kids who were born with blonde hair. Hell, I know a lot of black kids right now, black people right now, who have blonde hair on their arms. It is what it is. Um, but yeah, it's one of those things where like you got to pee pee. Really, I'm not answering that. Shinobi one. You should know the answer to that. we're talking about actual, optimizing your baby's health. Damn, we're not talking about if you have a big dick or not. But yeah, big or small, big or small, your dick's still going to produce the same amount of semen, unless you have any health problems that go with that. I'm just saying. Unless you have any health problems where like you have a low sperm count or anything like that, you should be fine if you have a big dick or a small dick. As long as you can spit out the same amount, the typical amount of semen that you can actually do, you'll be fine. Um, but yeah, that you should be fine as far as that. Your mom was not. We don't know that for sure, Manly Low. We're not going to pick on your mom in this live stream. I'm going to need you to be nice to your mom for this live stream. If it wasn't for her, you would not be here right now, and I wouldn't get to talk to you anymore. I'm just saying. So we're not going to pick on your mom in this live stream. Oh, see. Oh, I see what you're talking about. I didn't read the second half of that. Developmental was massively stunted. Okay, I see what you're talking about now. Yeah, that's unfortunate too, sadly. But you also have to take consideration too. The medical care wasn't as good as it is now when we were growing up as it is now, for all intents and purposes. So it wasn't as efficient and it wasn't as robust as it is now for all intents and purposes. So let's just put it this way: let's just say, if medical technology was what it was back then, what if it was where right now, you probably wouldn't experience a lot of that stuff that you did growing up for all intents and purposes. And there's a high chance you wouldn't. Um, make you know what Shinobi one. Uh, the fact that you can actually do something that takes discipline, and isn't really discipline can be a genetic trait. Discipline can be a genetic trait, but it all could be also could be a learned trait, depending on your environment. So it could be a genetic trait that you actually have innately, but on top of that, it can also be a learned trait based on your environment. Like a good example of that is if your dad was in the military, or if your mom was in the military, or if your mom's a neat freak, or if your mom's OCD. You could tend to run into those problems and end up and I'm talking about MGTOW from a discipline standpoint. I'm not talking about MGTOW physically. I'm talking about from a discipline standpoint. Basically, that's typically how it works. You simple. You know what? You know what? Head. Don't make me jack you up today. Don't make me find you in Discord later, pimpin'. No, but Oh, okay. I see what you're talking about. Gotcha, 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 gotcha. I'm sorry to hear that, man. I'm sorry to hear that, pimpin'. I'm sorry to hear that. Um. Oh wow, that sucks. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that doctor was there. 'Cause sometimes doctors come in and save the day for all intents and purposes. They don't get that much credit, sadly. Yeah, and simply in the UK are better than when I was. Yeah, that's simply how it works because medical technology has to catch up and to the times, and when stuff happens, that's when they actually start actually saying, this happened, so we got to fix this. And like it's one of those things where like the medical field, they never really think of like this could possibly happen, so we might want to look into this now and possibly have a machine or something in place for this. They typically wait till after shit hits the fan to actually start implementing other things that they probably should have thought of in the first place is what I've noticed with the medical field and the medical field for all intents and purposes when it comes down to it, when it comes to your health. They implement stuff after the fact that many people done ran through it and it's a big ass problem. That's when they start implementing it, when in fact that's something that you should have thought of peripherally when planning the SOPs for the medical practice for all intents and purposes. I mean, granted, I do know that certain things didn't pop up at the same time, and there's problems that that didn't really persist at the time when they were actually earning out their earning out everything as far as medical is concerned. But it's one of those things where you got to think about it peripherally. It's kind of like one of those things where like you learn about an off chance disease that happens that you don't know about, then it actually rears its head because then it rears its head in one of your patients for all intents and purposes. You don't really think about it until it's too late, or it comes to mind after you remember a certain disease that you read about in class as a doctor or a medical professional for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things where like you got to worry about that too. Um, but at the end of the day, all this pretty much amalgamates to you basically want to pick your partner. When you have your partner, you want to pick them. You want to have the best optimal chances of actually having an offspring with a plethora of genetic material for all intents and purposes. You don't want your genetic pool to be slim or very small. Typically, how that works is when your genetic pool is very slim or small, you tend to run into problems that you're running into today. with a lot of the single mothers, and the children ending up in, like, prison, or you know child mothers, or drug addicts, or runaways, or you know criminal, the damn near majority of the criminal population, and shit like that. So you end up running into a lot of these problems. You end up running into behavioral problems and medical problems all the same. So so you end up running into all these problems all the same if you're dating somebody who runs these problems. So you'll end up with, like, mental health issues, developmental issues, growth issues, um, not enough genetic markers to actually make it so your child can actually live a full successful life, and stuff along the lines of that. So you want your child to have a robust genetic pool when you actually pick your mate. So, like I said, at the end of the day, when it comes, the first rule of parenting is, it's not about you, it's about your children. Remember that, bank that, and pretty much keep it with you. Put that in your mental bank and take it with you. That's the first rule of parenting that every parent should know. It's not about you, it's about your child. Any decision that you make should be for your child. Because at the end of the day, I hear a lot of women that'll say, well, I did it for my child because, this, that, and the other. Well, no, you did it for yourself because you're being selfish. You didn't do it for your child, because if you actually did it for your child, you would have made better decisions in the first damn place for your child. This is typically how a lot of this stuff works. Because people don't think long term, or people always think hindsight. Well, I could have probably did this, or it could have probably been better. Well, no, you should have picked it. You should have went with a better choice in the first damn place, or made better decision. If you had a better decision making skills, you should have made better decision making skills, and you wouldn't have been in this mess in the first place. Is typically how this works. So, at the end of the day, you want to optimize your children's chances of having the best genetic markers known to man. This is not just looks. You want them to be able to sustain health wise, because there's a lot of people. The funny thing about good looking people, the good looking people tend to be the most unhealthiest people in the world. I've noticed. Oh my fucking god! I don't know how many times I've seen a person that's genetically good looking with a shit ton of health problems. Explain this to me, please. Um, these people suffer from a myriad of things. And I'm not talking about the people who go get plastic surgery to look good. I'm talking about the people who genetically came out good looking. They tend to suffer from a lot of health problems. Let it be chromosomes, let it be genetics, let it be mental health, let it be developmental stuff like that. Um, they suffer from a lot of those things. A lot of the good looking people in this world suffer from a lot of other problems. Let it be emotionally, mentally, developmentally, you name it, socially, and stuff like that, for all intents and purposes. Because I actually know a lot of good-looking people who are socially awkward, who couldn't even string together a word, or couldn't even be in a social setting in a heartbeat, even though they look good. They couldn't even do the whole entire social skill thing because they lack social skills, for all intents and purposes. So I know a lot of good-looking people who actually have poor social skills. As a matter of fact, there's more good-looking people with poor social skills than there are people who are ugly with poor social skills. Let that just sink in. Um, it's just stuff like that. So now, being tall, that's not it. That's being tall is not doesn't being tall is really, really nice. That's a nice gene to have. Don't get me wrong, but it's not one of those things where it's like, you know, it's not really one of those things that are important unless we end up in a dystopian society and you need the tall people to start reaching for high things. That's the only time that tall people really come in handy in this gynocentric society. Like, a good example of that is, like, I can reach the top shelf and a woman can't. Sucks being her. um, but yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you also got to. Wow. 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 That's interesting. Um, but yeah, typically a lot of the good looking people tend to have a shit ton of health problems. And I'm not talking, like I said, I'm not talking about the ones who go get like plastic surgery done to look good. I'm talking about who come out like just sexy for no damn reason. They tend to have all the health problems. Um, or not all the health problems, but a lot of health problems, and a lot of health risks actually reside within them. The health risk is strong within them. No, but let me stop. But so you typically want to pick somebody who can actually your child can actually benefit from, like, overall genetically. Let it be health and other problems. Like a good example of that is my family. Now I talked about my mom's side of the family. They typically suffer from like things like uh like cancer, or any type of like like high blood pressure and stuff like that. Um, the neat thing about my father's side of the family is they have a lot of genes in their family that compensate for my mother's family. So typically, like I was saying in one of the streams, like my mother's family might suffer from like something like diabetes or high blood pressure, but my father's side of the family has genes where it actually corrects high blood pressure and diabetes. Um, for all intents and purposes. So if you're suffering from this stuff, my father's side of the family actually has genes that correct this. Like a good example of that is typically how it works is if you're diagnosed, if you're an offspring of my mother's, or let's just say you were born into my family somehow, some way. Let's just say you ended up with high blood pressure, diabetes. The genetics in my father's family will eventually work itself out within a matter of like 3 years to 5 years, 3 to 5 years. It'll work it out, and it won't even be a thing, and it won't even be a thing anymore. It'll be a thing of a past for all intents and purposes. So basically, it's one of those things that you have to live with until the genes basically kick in and basically correct it. It's simply how that works. Good example of that is I was actually diagnosed at 17 with having high blood pressure. Now this runs in my mom's family very heavy. Okay, cool. So by the time I turned like 23, I no longer had that problem. By the time I was 23, I wasn't on any more blood pressure medicine. I wasn't getting my blood pressure checked on a regular basis. I never even had any blood pressure problems after that. Didn't have any kidney problems, or any kidney damage, or liver damage, or anything along the lines of that, which was actually really, really nice. So I only was a high blood pressure patient for about 5 years, for all intents and purposes, give or take 5 years. Um, it's typically stuff like that. Um, is the best way that I can actually put it to you. Another thing, well, yeah, about 23, 22, 23. Well, 22, I wasn't taking any medicine, but by 23, I would say I remember perfectly that year. I didn't see near doctor for that. I didn't see a doctor for any damn thing health wise that whole entire year when I was 23. I had no health problems whatsoever after I turned 23. 22, I think at the beginning, just as I was leading up to my 22nd birthday, I was running into a lot of problems. But like it worked itself out around the time my birthday, about like later when my birthday was starting to roll around, it worked itself out to the point where I didn't have to worry about these genetic problems anymore, coming from my mom's side. Um, but at the end of the day, it's one of those things where like you got to actually take in consideration when you actually do this and you want to have children. You basically got to look at your significant other and their gene pool and their health problems that they probably will pose to you. So you want to pay, as a man, you want to pay attention to all of that. You also want to take a look at your own genetic problems and your health problems that your family poses to your child also. So when you meet somebody, you typically want to meet somebody that's damn near opposite of you, pretty much opposite of you. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have genes that they're going to have genetics that you don't have. So when you have that baby, it's going to be it's going to be a damn near perfect baby for all intents and purposes, genetic wise. It's going to have a huge genetic pool to pull from, so it can actually always be self-correcting for all intents and purposes. Um, Stuff like that, because there's a lot of people even still that has like a lot of their you know genomes actually have junk genome. They have a lot of some people that have genes that have junk genes in the middle basically, and that's typically what they're talking about with splicing and fixing basically when it comes to that. Um, but yeah, it's one of those things where like you got to focus, and you don't want to pick with your small hit if you're a guy, like I said at the beginning of this, and I said a lot of stuff at the beginning of this lovely live stream. If you want to go back and check at the beginning, I'll say the first 20 minutes have like a lot of information in it about the direction of this live stream and like a lot of the stuff and picking and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you just got to choose wisely, choose your partners wisely, and be very smart and intelligent about how you choose your partners. Never choose a partner based on how they look. Choose your partner based on health, the health risk that your family and her family both have for all intents and purposes, because that's going to be the deciding factor on how healthy your child is or not for all intents and purposes. So just because a person looks good, that don't mean that they have good genes. Unless you have all the perfect genes in your family and you want to date somebody that looks good, that'd be the only way I say do it. If your genes aren't perfect and you don't have all the genetic markers to basically counteract that person's genetic markers or gene pool, or for the genes to basically choose from, so it can actually kick out certain genes that it doesn't need, then it's probably not going to work out too well for you. You're going to end up with like babies with autism, severe cases of autism, developmental issues, motor skill issues, functions, cognitive problems, stuff like that for all intents and purposes. Other things is like underdeveloped lungs, heart problems, liver problems, and other great crazy problems like that also as well. You'll end up with if you're dating somebody with poor genetics or somebody over a certain age. And typically, another problem that you'll have with women over a certain age is you're basically getting the worst of the worst eggs for all intents and purposes when you come down to it. So if you're dating a woman like I would say 28 plus, you're getting the worst possible eggs possible. You're getting the worst possible eggs, period, for all intents and purposes. Because at the end of the day, she don't went all her life destroying eggs and getting rid of eggs and waiting this long, and now you're basically getting like the worst of the worst eggs for all intents and purposes. So the eggs that she got in her system now aren't going to be the greatest eggs genetically to choose from. You might get lucky. If you do, that's one of them outliers. That's not one of those things where like everybody can do it. That's one of those things where like you just get lucky and you're an outlier for all intents and purposes, and not too many people get lucky and to be an outlier. So you don't want to. You basically want to avoid a woman that's in her later years, in her later 20s, for the fact that her egg selection is very low. Because what about like 80 to 90% of her eggs are gone by the time she's in her 30s. And some women have that problem. Some women in their mid to late 20s actually have this problem also as well. Like when they're like 27, 28, 29, a lot of women actually have this problem too. There's a lot of women in this bracket that have that problem. Then there's a lot of women that just can't have children at all. So it's one of those things that you're going to run into. Hell, there's a lot of women that only have one ovary, if you know what I mean. So it's one of those things where like you got to pick and choose. Or one fallopian tube, too, is another good example of that too. So you pretty much got to pick and choose wisely when it comes down to your partners. And you can't always rely on what your partner's saying to you if you're a man, because women will lie because they know they have to lie to get the best optimal to get a mate for all intents and purposes. They basically lie to get a mate. That's typically how that works. So a woman's going to lie to you just so she can optimize her chances of getting a good mate. So she's never going to tell the full truth about her health and her history for that reason, because she knows deep down inside it's wrong. They don't want to admit that they know this, but they actually do know this psychologically, which is actually coming up in a psychology of women last stream that I'm going to be, I mean, a podcast that I'm going to be doing next week for all intents and purposes. So yeah, no, I'm actually going to be doing it Saturday. I'm be doing that podcast Saturday. Sorry about that, but yeah. So that's the things that you got to worry about. And those are the problems you're going to run into as a man picking a woman, and the same thing goes for women. Don't take birth. If you're going to meet your significant other, take yourself off of birth control first. That's typically how that works. So if you're going to meet your significant other, don't be on birth control when you actually do it. That's the only thing I could really tell women. Don't be on birth control when you meet the person that you're going to fall in love with, because you're going to find out very quickly when you're not on that birth control, you're not in love with that person, and it's not going to be a sustainable relationship for all intents and purposes. Um, and my number one thing to take away from this is the overall thing that wraps this thing in a pretty bow. Let it be age, let it be genetics, let it be all this stuff. Is at the end of the day, first and foremost, parenting is not for you. It's not about you. It's about your children. Parenting, and within itself, in a nutshell, is about your children, not you. At the end of the day, um, but yeah, it's one of those things where like it's one of those things where like you got to optimize yourself and you got to actually do better by your children. And like I said at the beginning of this, live stream, I'm gonna reiterate one of the things I mentioned at the beginning of this live stream because I hate hearing this from parents. If your children are eating, you eat too. You don't have to cook yourself this amazing meal. You just eat something because your children are eating. It's that simple. Because you need to take care of yourself for your children. So all this bullshit, well, like, I'm hungry and I haven't eaten all day, eat something. An apple, orange, a banana, whatever the hell your children are eating, a carrot, a fucking celery stalk, whatever the hell, eat it so you can actually go on about your merry way. You should always have quick food around just in case shit happens, because shit will happen when you have children. Another thing that I always say to parents is, if your child is sleeping, you take your ass to sleep too. Don't be a dumbass and be trying to do chores. Those chores can wait till you wake the fuck up. Take your ass to bed when your children go to sleep, so you can optimize your chances of being a better parent when your children are awake. You don't want to be a tired ass parent and be stressed out for no fucking reason whatsoever, all because you decided to stay up and do some damn chores. And when you would have decided to go to sleep, now you can't go to sleep because your children are up. When your children go to sleep, take your ass to sleep. Period. When your children are eating, you eat too. Period. To better optimize your chances of being a better parent. Other than that, y'all have a blessed night. Be good to yourselves. Treat yourselves like milk. You don't spoil yourselves. Always improve upon yourself. Always expound upon your knowledge, and always be willing to learn new things and keep an open mind. Everybody, be good to yourselves and be good to other people. Help other people that need to be helped or that want to be helped. Don't waste your time on people who don't need to be helped or don't want no help and they just want to complain. Let them lay where they lay and let them figure it out for themselves. Y'all be blessed. Have a good day and be good to yourselves and get proper rest and get proper rest and nutrition. Adios, my niggas. I'll make a live stream about that most definitely. But I talked about some of that at the beginning of this live stream too, when it came to like the whole entire parenting thing. But I'm going to make a live stream on that one when it comes to the psychology of women this Saturday for all intents and purposes. So that's going to be in the psychology of women last podcast on Saturday. Um, but yeah, y'all have be blessed and have a good one. Um, hopefully y'all learn something from this, and there'll be a part 3 that'll probably be dropping next week for red pill parenting part 3 will pretty much be dropping next week because I don't want to load people up on red pill parenting and them get tired of it. So I'll drop them like either every week, every other week, every week or every other week for all intents and purposes, so you won't get caught up on it. Y'all be blessed and have a good night, and take your red pills and make time for life.